Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Somm TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. We're going to do our part two of our Portugal conversation that we started with Elaine Chacon-Brown just a few weeks ago. And this one, we're going to get a little geeky, all right? So put your glasses on and let's talk wine regions and grapes in Portugal. This is a place that if you listen to our first pod, we just pretty much gushed over a country we love and the wines that we love. So back on the podcast today, I have the host of our master classes, which you can watch right now on Somm TV, about the grapes and the regions of the wines of Portugal. But we also have our all-new documentary about this region with lots and lots of winemakers and some of the best wines that you can find there featured. And it is a really, really, really good piece. I'm very proud of it, and I hope all of you subscribers are watching that. Elaine, it's great to have you back on the podcast. Are you ready to get a little geeky with me here?
Absolutely. It's my favorite thing to do.
Is it?
I try to be serious and playful at the same time, which maybe makes me confusing, but actually it's just called fun.
Good. Well, I think in a lot of cases when you talk like wine 101, you're basically saying it exists. You're pretty much like, here's the place, here's why we like it, here's what there is, and then you go any deeper and it's a little off topic. Now with wine 201 or whatever we want to call this, now we can actually talk about what they grow, kind of our feelings about it, and also kind of walk through some of the regions. And obviously, if you're a Somm TV subscriber, after you listen to this, go watch the masterclasses so you can get a visual reference on what we're talking about. But if you're in your car, let this seep in while you drop your kids off at school or whatever it is you're doing. I think to be able to speak about a region like this and feel like many people have not had a chance to visit it, it'll blow your mind if you get a chance to go to this place. But the next best thing is to be able to drink these wines. And let's start off. If I was to ask you, where do we start in Portugal? Do we want to start with the largest region or where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, starting kind of southeastern Portugal, Alentejo, it's such a great way to get a taste of the country, because the Alentejo is, as I said, southeastern Portugal. The greater part of the region is a whole 2/3, I think, of the landmass that is the country of Portugal. The wine region, the vineyards, of course, would be not quite as big as that, but it's so varied and so beautiful, but also just this warm, inviting region, imagine rolling hills, some sweeping plains. The soil types are profoundly varied. There's granite, schist, there's even marble there, which just kind of blows my mind. I don't know why the idea of finding marble in the wild is so exotic to me, but it's just like, what? I could just find marble in the ground in Alentejo? This blows my mind. But the history of winemaking goes all the way back before the Roman era. But the reason I bring up the Roman era is because Alentejo became this really important wine and food growing region for the empire. And thankfully, it's Portugal went on after that. And now it's this independent area that's making really dynamic, delicious wines. The producers that you and I were able to share a couple weeks ago and just really enjoy their wines, like they've been able to kind of harness the warmth of the southern part of the country and bring finesse to their style. And I think that's so admirable too, is people that understand their wine growing place so well that they can harness the warmth to bring a delicious, flavorful quality to the glass, but then also dial in their time in the vineyard with so much excellence that they capture finesse, retain structure, get that mouth-watering, palate-cleansing quality. So Herdade de Peso, they're one of the producers that you and I were able to sit down and enjoy together. And I just think that they do such a good job finding that balance.
Yeah, agreed. Is this region, would you say it's more known for the reds?
Yeah, I mean, there are beautiful whites that are also made in Alentejo, but by far it's more well-known for reds. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the grapes. I mean, so Alentejo it's a vast, enormous region. But if we're going to pick some grapes to talk about, Where do we start? I mean, I assume we want to start with Touriga Nacional probably, or
Yeah, so I mean, Touriga Nacional is a great place to start because it actually is planted throughout the country of Portugal. It's sort of, from what we understand, it sort of we think it originates in the north of the peninsula, but it's such a successful, dynamic grape that it's been planted throughout Portugal, and it does really well in Alentejo. So I'd say if we want to pick a traditional grape and a surprising grape, I'd say the traditional grape to talk about would be Touriga Nacional. But then for surprise, Alicante Boucher is one of the world's truly unique red wine grapes, and that also does very well in Alentejo. So those would be the two that I'd pick if that sounds good to you.
sounds great. So where do you, when we talk about Touriga Nacional, what is it? I hate this question. I'm just going to preface that. What is it like? So for people who have not tried it, I know it's often blended. I have seen several examples where it's purely bottled, but what is it like? How do you describe the wines that are predominantly this grape?
I think we should admit it's unusual for it to be done on its own. You can
Mhm.
find that now because the wine world is so willing to be experimental, but it comes from a history of blending. And in my mind, Touriga Nacional brings deeper tone flavors and backbone. Like those are sort of hallmark characteristics of this grape. Absolute backbone, this upright structural quality, and then this depth of flavor. Um, it can be brooding and introspective, yet flavorful at this and mouth-watering at the same time.
Brooding. I like this very much. It's like a late 1800s writer of poetry.
Absolutely. I think the more we
very
can
good.
compare grapes to literature, the better.
Yeah, I like that. I think this is a grape that I hate to call it bigger. You know, it's got a lot of power behind it. Oftentimes, is that fair to say?
Yeah, see, the thing for me is that the thing I find fascinating about Portuguese reds is that they so commonly have power, but I think they often accomplish that without having to have incredible size. So you get this, again, this like intensity of palate experience, of flavor experience, but there's still room in the mouth to enjoy it, so to speak. You know, there in wine there's a history of thinking impact has to come with size. So the bigger the wine, the better, power comes with size. But actually, what Portugal does so well is to have profound flavor that doesn't dominate you. So you have this sense of intensity and power, but again, this kind of restraint of size at the same time. And I love that combo. It gives, in my mind, that combo leaves room for pleasure. When the wine is so big that it just takes over your mouth, you're almost have to recover from it. But what the wines we're talking about from Portugal do is they give you this intensity of flavor, but they leave room for you to breathe so you can enjoy that intensity.
That's actually a really good way to put it. Because the other thing too is a lot of the wines that I don't know, we'll say famous or people think should be famous are those wines that are so big that they're like have it with a steak and burn the steak. And the reason they're saying that is because it can't hold up to anything else because it's just so it's a certain thing, which is fine if you're smoking a cigar by the fire. But if you're actually having a conversation with 10 people at a dinner table, it can be very tough to have some of those wines. So, which is a perfect contrast to Alicante Boucher, which as somebody who's into just I'm just looking at grapes. This is just one of the most interesting grapes ever. Because when you cut a grape open, normally, even a red wine, that pigment comes from its skin. It macerates on the fruit on the skins, and then it turns redder or it turns darker. And there are tricks and hacks around that. Sometimes adding a white wine can make something darker, and we won't get into that. But when you look at Alicante Boucher and you cut it open, it looks its flesh is red,
Yeah,
and
the juice
this is
itself
just
is red. Yeah.
such a fascinating grape. I mean, what is your experience with this grape? I think the first time I had it was actually in California because they do plant some. Ridge has some, and I was blown away by this thing. It's just so bizarre. It's like not one you want to have. You don't want to. mess around this grape in your whites, wearing like a white t-shirt or something,
Yeah, right,
because
right.
it is going to bleed on you. What's your experience with Alicante Boucher?
Well, so the funny thing is, you mentioned California, and historically it's played a really important role here. So, California learned from Portugal and other parts of Europe that field blends were a really smart way to ensure that even with different types of weather across different vintages, you would still end up with a beautiful balanced wine. So Alicante Boucher did really well in cooler areas where producers were afraid maybe the hardier reds wouldn't ripen well enough, and Alicante would guarantee to bring some of that color that you're talking about, but also sort of fruit presence, fruit flavor. So the funny thing is that it's played this historically important role in California, and I've lived in California almost as long as I've had my wine career. But the first time I encountered it actually was in Alentejo. I did a trip there several years ago, and we got to walk through this kind of library block vineyard where there were, 40 different varieties planted, and we could kind of walk through and see differences in how they grew and what the fruit looked like. And that was the first time I encountered Alicante Boucher. The person that I was with said, "Hey, come, let's see this grape." And they took some of the fruit off the vine and they cut it open like you're talking about. And it just like the juice ran down their hand red. And the truth is, like you were describing, other red wine grapes, when you squeeze them or cut them open, the juice is clear. It doesn't have the color. Their grape skins have the color. But Alicante Boucher, all the way through, it has the color. One of the things that's fascinating to me, too, is that actually with Alicante Boucher, even the leaves will have red streaks through them. Like you can see where the sap flow of the vine moves because it turns red. And historically, people have worried that there was a virus with this grape type, but it's that no, Alicante Boucher is a red variety. Even its leaves turn red, and I find that really beautiful, and it's quite unique in the world. There's only a few grape types that we make wine out of that have this quality of having red juice or red pulp, not just red skins. And Alicante Boucher is, I just think, really one to be celebrated.
What does it taste like?
So it has this very upfront fruit quality, and it's possible to make a very simple, flavorful, fruit-driven wine from it. But from older vines, it gains depth and can pick up the kind of the earthy mineral quality of the place that it grows as well. And so you can have, and actually Herdad de Peso, they make an Alicante Boucher wine. It's just purely Alicante, and you can really retain the friendliness of the variety, but the way that they make it and respect the vines in the vineyard, you get this real depth to it at the same time.
Yeah, it's really kind of one of a kind. The fact that they bottle that only on its own.
Yeah,
this is Elaine, this is my favorite thing about getting into wine. You think you have a grasp on something, and then something else comes along, and then they do a single bottling, and you go, well, the thing I thought I got a grasp on that was new, I don't have a grasp on. This is why it's so fun to be in this world, because it is a never ending carrot in front of your nose that you just keep walking towards. It's incredible.
The truth is that I it's in my nature to be very driven, and when people that naturally have intense drive, it's easy for that to turn into perfectionism. And the way that I dealt with that to avoid unhealthy perfectionism, I picked a career where perfection is impossible. So with wine, there's always more to learn. There's always stuff we have no idea about. And for me, that's this incredible relief, because I can let go of worrying about doing it perfectly and just be like, holy crap, there's so much more stuff I could study. This is so cool. So it channels the drive in a healthier way.
Yeah. Well, as someone who made Somm, I can say that there are some unhealthy ways that you can drive that direction.
Yeah.
But anyways, so we travel north, and we gushed quite a bit about the Douro, which is epic. It's like if you were to take Lord of the Rings and plant vines,
Right.
it's kind of got this, deeply carved. The river has carved this incredible canyon. And I think it is one of the absolute most beautiful, most wild, and most rewarding wine regions that I've ever filmed in and traveled to. And so when we get to the Douro, let's have a conversation about that place. How big is that region and how important is it to Portugal?
It's hugely important, and its reputation is bigger than its size. It stretches west to east. And again, like you said, it's a river valley carved out by the Douro River, super dynamic, rugged, incredible, beautiful, like one of the most beautiful regions in the world, regardless of wine. And it's protected from the cold Atlantic by the mountains that the river itself has helped carve. But even so, the western side of the Douro Valley is cooler, and because it is closer to the Atlantic. So it's protected from the kind of harshest parts of the ocean, but nevertheless, the ocean does cool that western side down. And then as you move east, it gets warmer, so that the warmest part is up against the border of Spain. A lot of the Douro Valley is really profoundly difficult to get into. And the truth is, a lot of it didn't get electricity until the late 80s parts of it, because it's so rugged and so remote that trying to just pipe in electricity was incredibly difficult. And so the first time I went to the Douro, I was lucky enough to tour around with someone who was local, and they took me back into over mountain ridges that are far removed actually from the river itself, and areas that like tourists have never been. And I got to go into these old family wineries, very small, low ceiling buildings, where these areas were so remote that families would simply stay on their property because it was hard to get out to get anywhere else. And that meant that they had to have a complete farm to feed their families. But part of that complete farm were old vineyards, and they would harvest their own fruit and then make the wine on site in their own winery. And kind of, they would drink some of it, but then of course they would also send samples out that people would consider to blend for making port wine. So that's historically how things were done. But it's just an incredible region. It's actually the oldest certified region in the world. But, it was recognized officially in the 1700s and started being regulated as far back as then, which is pretty incredible. Wow. And today not only makes port wine, but really beautiful still table wine as well.
Yeah, so I'm holding a bottle that it's featured in your masterclass from the Dworum wine producer. I really loved this wine. I thought it was excellent. I'm every time I taste it, it's one of these wines where, God, but I love to see how this ages, because they nailed the blend on this pretty well. But there are two grapes. We've already talked about Touriga Nacional. In this, there's Touriga Franca, and that's an interesting juxtaposition. Mm-hmm. Touriga Franca. What can you tell me about this grape?
Well, so it's one of the most planted varieties in Portugal. It might be the most planted, but I'd need to double check that. But it's definitely one of the most planted. It plays this very important role in Portuguese red wines, and again, historically has played this really important role for port wine as well. And I in my mind, it's this like core of any wine. So like if you're Portugal is really built from this tradition of blending, both in the vineyard through field blend style plantings, and then now more recently in the cellar as well, doing intentional blends there. And anytime you're going to approach blending a wine, again, whether through planting or through the cellar, you still need to imagine like, what's the core? What do we want the heart of the wine to be? And Touriga Nacional brings this combination of intriguing earthiness.
Touriga Franca, you mean?
Excuse me. And Touriga Franca brings this combination of intriguing earthiness with these juicy, fresh purple tones that can range from kind of violet-style blossoms, wildflowers, to purple fruits as well. But that combination I find beautiful and unusual, that you can get these purple tones and an earthiness, and even with age, some of those beautiful tertiary qualities of leather or tobacco as well. But in my mind, Touriga Franca really offers the heart of a wine. that you can then build a blend around.
Yeah, that's the majority in this bottle. And then there's Trigo Nacional, but then there's Tinta Roriz, which I'm sure my Portuguese friends are loving my pronunciation on this grape. So the idea of a field blend, the idea of doing the way they blend wine in Portugal, I think is one of the most fascinating things. But a lot of people probably have not heard of Tinta Roriz. It's not a grape that I think is commonly, I'm unaware of it being planted anywhere near where I live in California. What do you know about this grape?
Well, so it plays this important accent element in blends in Portugal. It's not all that common there either compared to Touriga Franca or Touriga Nacional. But that said, it brings this wonderful spice and really flavorful accent. So kind of a mix of world spices rather than just, in the US, oftentimes if we talk about spice in a wine, we mean like baking spices, kitchen spices. But I think that Tinta Roriz brings this like wonderful complex of world spices and a slightly warming quality, not in the sense of alcohol warmth, but just this, it opens up the mouth.
Brightening type of a thing?
A brightening quality. Yeah. And so it's far less planted than the other two reds that we're talking about, but it plays this really important role. It adds this, extra sense of character to a wine.
So what food are we talking here? This is a red wine with some body. What would you pair with this? I mean, obviously it's easy in Portugal. You're going to get all sorts of incredible meat dishes and stuff like that, but holidays are here. What am I having with this wine?
Well,
this is a blended red wine.
Yeah, the Dwarm, I think, offers a really lovely versatility because it could work with all sorts of meat dishes, as well as, here in the States, people tend to have, mashed potatoes and different types of meat gravies and a mix of pork or turkey or some kind of braised beef. I think all of those would be really beautiful with this particular wine. Something that I always find a way to bring up with you is moose meat, just because I'm from Alaska. And I just thawed moose backstrap that I'm going to cook tonight. I'm going to do kind of a slow saute to really melt some onion and then sear, rub the moose backstrap with some thyme and then sear the two sides and then cover it so that it's just very lightly cooked. The Dwarm would be the perfect wine to have with that kind of meal. So, I might be trying to pop that open tonight.
I know there's a great shortage of due to the supply chain of moose meat. So I hope all of you were able to secure your moose backstraps before this podcast.
Yeah,
there'll be a run on moose meat now. It's always great to have an Alaskan on the pod. And then, so we leave the Douro, which I would never do personally if I had my option and I was there, and we go north to, like, I think that the Vinho Verde region is the equivalent of a gateway situation. If you've had the whites from up there, and especially considering how incredibly priced they all are, if you've had the whites from up there, you know what I'm talking about. These are if you have to have white wine at a dinner and you want to sort of appeal to everybody, this is always one of my first things that I jump on. Alvarinho and some of these other white grapes that they grow in this region are stupendous food wines. Very accessible. Everybody will like them, from the snootiest person at the table to your aunt who just wants a glass of white wine. It is right down the pipe. Great stuff. So talk to me about this region. What is it like? What do they grow?
Vinho Verde is so beautiful, and it's the one region that I could maybe say, if you're trying to find comparisons, there's parts of kind of farm areas of the eastern United States that are lush and green, really vibrant, but full of rolling river valleys like that. That would be an easy comparison. Vinho Verde is full of small river cuts and valleys with rolling hills surrounding those, and a lot of the vineyards are growing closer to these rivers, and the area it's pleasant and beautiful and lush green and really, really influenced by the cold Atlantic. and so that's why you get these just smashing whites, just absolutely mouth-smacking, delicious, mouth-watering white wines, because it has that very cool influence, but then also the vibrancy of that green river valley. So it's really a special area, and like you're saying, I just think they're just the right go-to wines for when you want to make sure you have white wines at your table. And the truth is, we should always make sure we have white wines at the table. It's the perfect way to start. It opens up the palate, gets your mouth watering, gets you ready for food, gets you happy.
Yes.
Let's all start happy.
Certain family members, and I won't call any of mine out, but some of them require white wine for me to be around them.
Yeah,
they
just
understand. They probably need it for me too.
Well, because the thing about a really great Vino Verde is that it's energizing and enlivening. It gets you in the right mood. It gets you happy, like I said. It wakes you up, gets you happy. And that's the perfect way to get ready to deal with challenging family members or just a really beautiful day. So
that's right. And the alcohol is pretty, they're very in check and balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I find to be something that is not often findable in a lot of wines that you can get. Sometimes, you'll like a wine, but the alcohol can sneak up on you. I don't know if you've ever had that experience.
Oh my God, never. No.
Never.
No, but Vino Verde, they're refreshing and delicious at the same time.
I guess we should do a minute on Alvarinho, the grape. It's really impossible to talk about this region without talking about that. It's synonymous with Albarino in Spain, though they do a very different thing in Portugal. In a lot of cases, they also blend it. And so just give me a minute on Alvarinho, the grape.
Yeah, so it does really well in coastal influenced areas. And that's part of why it's more common in Vino Verde. That tends to be where you find it for Portugal. And in Spain, you mentioned Albarino. In Spain, we tend to see it on its own, just straight Albarino. But Portugal is so talented and skilled at blending. And so I do love that in Vino Verde, you can also find it blended with other indigenous varieties from the region. And the opportunity you have then is to really capture the mouthwatering acidity, the incredible length, and the freshness that Albarino gives, and then couple it with something like Loureiro, which is native to the area, and get a little more flesh and roundness at the same time, and so then really dial in what kind of style of wine do you want. It has a lot of versatility. It's a variety that tends to be brilliant with seafood. But the thing about Vino Verde is you don't have to only drink it with oysters. You can absolutely do baked whitefish with it. And then, of course, bacalhau, the salt fish tradition. It's such a brilliant pairing with that as well. So there's just, in my mind, versatility is really the defining feature of the variety.
Yeah, and salad and vegetables and all that stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So, well, Elaine, this is an insane pleasure for me to do this. Now I'm gonna end this podcast and I'm gonna go drink 8 glasses of wine and probably try to find some bacalhau. But this is really fun to do this with you. And I want to tell everybody there's 2 master classes with Elaine, and there is a documentary about the wines of Portugal right now on SOM TV, which is $49.99 for an entire year, and a great gift for the holidays. And we thank you all who do subscribe and recommend it as a gift very much. I want to tell all of you to be safe, be nice to your family over the holidays, or at least try to, and make sure you bring some Portuguese wine. We're going to put all the wines we've talked about in both of these parts in the show notes, so you can all get what we're talking about. Elaine, thank you for being on the pod. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Good stuff. All right, everybody, be safe.